ask this for Yasser al-Hanafi or Dr. Shadi al-Masri. If you believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, his actions can have a beginning in time, and yet they subsist with his essence and are not created, is this a deviant position? Is this bid'ah? Or is it merely only a mistake? Or is it kufr? Which level does it fit into? That's what we want to know, because this is the Salafi position. This is the position of Ahl al-Hadith. Okay, so many of you have seen a recent video that I put out on the discussion of whether or not the Quran is created. I played a clip from Dr. Shadi al-Masri where he explained his view in a very short amount of time, and some people thought that I misrepresented his position, either because he didn't have enough time to speak and very clearly explain what the Ash'ari view was, although I think he did a decent job within 1 minute. And also they claimed that I misrepresented him with the thumbnail of my previous video on this topic, because it somehow accused him of saying that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not speak. Now, as we'll see in this video, and I say this unfortunately, and I genuinely mean unfortunately, that thumbnail has been vindicated. Many people complained about the thumbnail. Oh wow, brother, you're making it look like Dr. Shadi al-Masri tweeted this. First of all, if you look at my other videos, you guys will see that I put this about video on Trump where it said something. It's not meant to make it look like the person actually tweeted this out. That's not the point. The point is that whatever I'm saying in the video and has the person saying, if it's not a quote, then you don't expect it to be a direct quote. It's what I'm attributing to that person, what I believe their position actually entails or what it actually is. So Dr. Shadi al-Masri never came out and said, quote, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala cannot speak. He never explicitly stated that. But as we'll see, that actually is his position, and that actually is the Ash'ari position. So after my video, he invited on Yasser al-Hanafi onto his channel, who I believe is another Ash'ari, where they attempted to explain what the Ash'ari view was. They didn't mention me by name, but several times they alluded to me or referred to me indirectly, and everybody knew what the video was about and who they were responding to. Now within that video, there was so many things that I could respond to, so many misrepresentations, so many things that they said that are contradicted by the Quran, Sunnah, and the Salaf as-Salih. So many. But unfortunately, if I were to address every single one of them in their hour-and-a-half stream, it would probably take me 3 hours to do it. So I'm going to address it bit by bit. I may address other parts in future videos, but the main topic is, can or does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speak? And we're going to see what exactly that question means and how they answer it here in just a second. So I'm going to play a short clip from them, and then I'm going to explain what their actual position is from, commentary on that clip, and then I'm going to show what their own scholars have said, and then I'll give a bonus and explain what the correct position actually is and what our position as Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah actually is. So let's take a look at that clip.
We're saying, no, he does speak, but that sound is a created sound.
Yes, exactly.
The letter is a created letter. This is the same answer when somebody says, you say God is mute. No, we say he speaks with the created sounds.
Yes.
Right? And created words.
Yes.
Right? So, and that is by his own saying.
So far, very clearly, what is Dr. Shadi saying? He's saying, wait, we're being accused of saying that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not speak, or he cannot speak, or that he's mute, which that is an accusation, and I'm going to demonstrate that that accusation is actually genuinely correct. Why? Because look what he just said. We do say, in response to the claim that we say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala cannot speak, or that he's mute, what do we say? We say that he does speak, but he speaks with created letters and sounds. And then you'll see in more detail exactly what he means by that. But then he says, and why do we say that? And then he goes on to quote 2 verses or 2 ayahs from the Quran where he thinks support his view that the Arabic Quran is created and that this is how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks with created sounds and letters. So let's continue listening to them give their little exegesis. And it's funny, I'm not going to go into it, but I just want to note at the outset that the ayahs, the verses of the Quran that they use actually were used by the Jahmiyyah and the Mu'tazila, and Imam Ahmed actually responds to those verses that they used. So it's interesting that the Ash'aris are using the same verses of the Quran that the Mu'tazila and Jahmiyyah used to say that the Quran is makhluq, to say that the Quran is created.
جعلناه القديم لا يجعل. Right? We have made it in Arabic Quran, if anything is qadim, it is pre-eternal. It cannot be made into something. Pre-eternal is as it is. Neither you can add to it or decrease from it. So this is the ayah that you mentioned earlier from Surah Az-Zukhruf, and the other one, مَا يَأْتِيهِم مِّن ذِكْرٍ مِّن رَبِّهِم. There is no mention, no remembrance of Allah that comes. Muhdathin. Yeah.
The word muhdath means originated. It means incipient. It means coming into existence. Also, the verse also comes in so Surah Al-Anbiya, verse number 2. We mentioned Surah Zukhruf, verse number 3. Yes, also in Surah Shu'ara, verse 5. So Surah 26, verse number 5. وَمَا يَأْتِيهِم مِّن ذِكْرٍ مِّنَ الرَّحْمَنِ مُحْدَثٍ إِلَّا كَانُوا عَنْهُ مُعْرِضِينَ. So similar to the verse in Surah Anbiya.
Yeah. How do you respond to this? And to summarize again, why somebody, how can you say, accusation, you say God is mute. We say God is mute. When he wishes to speak, he can speak with any sound he wishes, because that sound is created, right?
Yes.
So again, to summarize to the accusation, does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speak? We need to be very clear here. When I say speak, I'm talking about speech as an action, as a verb. Does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speak as an action? What's his answer to that? He does, but by created letters and sounds. And we'll see from their own scholars like Arazi exactly what that means. He is representing one of the views held by the Ash'ari, so I'm not disputing that, but we'll see just why it is so problematic and why, in actual fact, my thumbnail, which everyone was complaining about, is vindicated, completely vindicated. What does it mean for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speak? For him to create letters and sounds, and that somehow represents his speech. This is the claim. What I want to do now is I want to go through a couple references here for you from their own scholars of the Ash'ari tradition. Now, I'm going to use one that is one of the heads of the Ash'ari school. Nobody's going to dispute that he's genuine authority. Not to say that you need to make taqleed of him, but to show that it's not just me misrepresenting their position as if I don't understand what the position here is. So as you can guys see on the screen, this is from Arazi. And what does Arazi say when he's dealing with this issue regarding Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's speech? He says, if you understand this, meaning what preceded it, there's a whole section, but to condense it and for time's sake, he says, if you understand this, we say, meaning the Ash'ari say, when the Almighty wills something or dislikes something, he creates these specific sounds in a particular body, in a particular jism, to indicate his will for that specific matter or his dislike for it, or to signify his ruling on it, whether in affirmation or negation. This is what is meant by the statement that the Almighty speaks. So what is meant by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaking? Exactly what Dr. Shadi said, according to Arazi and the Ash'aris. What does it mean for God to speak? What it means for God to speak is for him to create letters and sounds in a jism, in a physical body, outside of himself. And that somehow means that he is the one that is speaking. This is the claim. Again, Arazi says, so it becomes established on account of what we had mentioned, meaning what we just mentioned, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala being mutakallim, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala being a speaker, one who actually speaks, him being a mutakallim, not in the deviant sense of a practitioner of kalam, God forbid. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala being a mutakallim, one who speaks, is what? With the meaning that is said by the Mu'tazila, is what we say, and we acknowledge it, and we do not reject it from any angle at all. Indeed, the difference between us, meaning the Ash'aris, and them, meaning the Mu'tazila, is that we affirm another matter beyond this, which they reject. And I'll explain what that means in just a second. And we shall mention what that thing is. And then he goes on to explain it, but I have another quote from another contemporary scholar, Al-Buti, who I think summarizes the Ash'ari position very well. So to be very clear, the question of this video is, does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speak? Now, of course, I believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks by his will and his power. It's an action of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala which subsists with his essence. It's not something that he creates outside of him and then he's called mutakallim in light of that. No, which is a ridiculous position to hold to, and I'll explain why in just a second. But very clear clearly, how does the Ash'ari answer it? What Dr. Shadi and Arazi said? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is a mutakallim, one who speaks. And what does it mean for him to speak? That he creates letters and sounds outside of himself in created objects in physical bodies. That's what it means for him to speak. That would be like me putting a sound in the computer or something like that, and then I say, well, in virtue of the computer making letters and sounds and having a voice and saying things, I am attributed with being a speaker, or I am attributed with speaking in light of the computer speaking. That's basically what they're saying, which is a ridiculous notion. We wouldn't say that, oh, a mute person, a literal mute person, someone who cannot speak, we wouldn't say that he is speaking or he speaks because a computer is somehow now speaking out in the ether, or a phone or whatever. This is what they're saying. That's not the common understanding of what it means to say that someone is speaking or someone is a speaker. But this is their conception. This is what they're trying to say. And I don't have the quote, I didn't mention here because I don't want to make the video too long, but At-Tabari, the one who is very famous for his tafsir, who all Sunnis appeal to his works on tafsir, he explicitly refutes the Mu'tazila who had this position, because Arazi says that this is the position of the Mu'tazila, that God creates letters and sounds in something else, and in virtue of that, he is a mutakallim, he is a speaker. At-Tabari actually brings up this position and refutes it and says, this is ridiculous to say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is a speaker, someone who speaks, just because he created sounds and letters. That would be like saying, well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is a particular color because he created a particular color. Well, that would be like, astaghfirullah, saying that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the color orange because he created the color orange in a physical body. Nobody says that. And At-Tabari says that this is basically a ridiculous position, and he gives other examples about this. Furthermore, what is the additional thing? So there's points of agreement between the Mu'tazila and the Ash'aris. They agree that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala being attributed as a speaker or an act of speech just means that he creates letters and sounds in physical bodies. But then he says, but we also affirm something in addition to that. So what do Ash'aris affirm in addition to that? They affirm something which they call a sifa, which is qadim, which is eternal, that they say subsists with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's essence, and they call it kalam. They say that it's a speech, but it's not made up of letters, words, sounds. It doesn't have a beginning or an end. It's just what? A ma'na established with his essence. It's just a meaning, whatever that is supposed to mean. It's just a meaning that is established with his essence. But if you try to dig deeper to understand what it is, there's not good explanation. So that's the additional thing that they affirm. But we'll see that Al-Buti, who is somebody who will be honest in this case, that the Mu'tazila in reality, they affirm that whatever the Ash'aris consider to be kalam, that eternal sifa, the Mu'tazila just said that that reduces to his ilm, to his knowledge. So we'll see that in this quote here. So Al-Buti, who is a modern Ash'ari scholar who he died about, I think 10 or 11 years ago, 15 years ago, something like that. He says, here, the Mu'tazila differed from the majority, and he's referring to the Ash'aris in that sense, as they did not attribute to Allah a timeless attribute known as speech or internal, not eternal, speech. In this sense, they, the Mu'tazila, had said, indeed, the sense or the meaning, or what Yasir al-Hanafi went on and on and on about, the madlul of the expressions to which you have applied the name al-kalam al-nafsi, what is it? It returns in reality to the attribute of knowledge or ilm. So what did the Mu'tazila respond to the Ash'aris? We don't deny kalam nafsi. We just say that what you're calling kalam nafsi, we think goes back to ilm, to knowledge. And then that's where the only dispute between them actually is. Al-Buti says, if this meaning is information, it returns to the attribute of irada, if it is a command or prohibition. As for the expressions themselves, then they are words which are temporally originated and are created from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Just as we have all agreed upon this, for they are not the attribute of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Most High, but they are a creation from amongst His creatures, and the word kalam is nothing but an explanation of this meaning. So what is the difference between the Mu'tazila and the Ash'aris? The Ash'aris are claiming to affirm a distinct sifa called kalam, but the Mu'tazila say what you consider kalam and how you describe it, we believe in that, but we just say that that's reduced to ilm, to knowledge. Then Al-Buti continues. He says, when you reflect upon what we have mentioned, you will have grasped the point of difference between the Mu'tazila and Ahl al-Sunnah wal Jama'ah. In that case, he's referring to the Ash'aris and Maturidis. And it is, and not even the Hanbalis, as we'll see him admit in just a second. And it is, there is a meaning of the words of the Quran from the command, prohibition, information. They're all composed of, and which are directed to mankind, and which is eternal, qadim, and he's referring here to the ma'na, or the meaning that I just went over. Now he says, so what is the name of this meaning, of this ma'na? The Mu'tazila say its name is knowledge, ilm. If it is informing with knowledge or wish or desire, it is command or prohibition, then it goes back to irada. Then he says the majority, and of course here he's referring to the Ash'aris, which we will dispute, but we'll go for the sake of argument. The Ash'aris say its name is what? Kalam nafsi, and it is an attribute in addition to both ilm and irada, which is established with the essence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the dispute is really at this point a dispute over whether they call it kalam nafsi or they call it ilm or irada or whatever. But in terms of concept of what they're affirming the same thing. Now somebody will say, no, but they're just affirming a distinct attribute of kalam. Well, in actual fact, the Mu'tazila don't really affirm any real attributes, because all of the attributes they claim to believe in divine simplicity, they say are identical to each other and identical to the essence. If you don't understand that, I have a whole video on that topic, but the Ash'aris deny this. So you can't say, oh, well, they're actually affirming a distinct sifa opposed to ilm. Well, they're not even affirming a distinct sifa of ilm altogether, because they say that ilm is the same thing as irada and is also the same thing as the that of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the essence. So that's not going to work. In concept, they're affirming the same thing. What does it mean for God to speak or be a mutakallim? For him to create sounds or words in created ajsam or bodies, and that somehow means that God is speaking because these created words or sounds exist in these created things. What's the difference between the Mu'tazila and the Ash'aris? The Mu'tazila agree with that, no difference there, but they say what you call kalam nafsi, we just call ilm or irada. Then he admits here, and he says, and that is not established with the essence. As for the speech al-kalam, which is the wording, then they are agreed, the Ash'aris and the Maturidis agree that it is makhluk, it is created, meaning the Arabic Quran or anything that contains words or letters is makhluk, is created, and that it is not established with his essence, with the exception of Ahmad ibn Hanbal and some of his followers. So he's admitting that Imam Ahmad did not have the same position as the Ash'aris and the Mu'tazila. Now, I believe that he goes on to not very accurately represent Imam Ahmad's position, but nevertheless, he's admitting that they didn't have the same position. So I hope it's clear at this point what the difference between the Mu'tazila and the Ash'aris are. When it comes to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala being a speaker or acting as an act of speech, he doesn't do that. The only thing that you can say is an act of speech are within creation itself, whether you refer to the relations, which are supposedly the body and only in the mind, right? Or you say that the act equals the effect, right? And we'll see from Imam al-Bukhari that this is the position of the Jahmiyyah, and he refutes it explicitly. So what is our position? Our position is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is attributed with an eternal attribute called kalam, which is his ability to speak. He can speak whenever he wills, by his will and his power. Then when it comes to specific acts of speech, when he spoke to Musa alayhi salam, when he revealed the Quran to Jibreel alayhi salam, or the different examples, when he will speak to us on Judgment Day, those are all acts of speech that happen at that particular time and that subsist with his essence. Now, why did the Ash'aris deny this? In reality, it's not only about the acts of speech, it's not only about kalam or the Quran or anything like that, it's about the actions of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in general. Do the Ash'aris believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has actions that subsist with his essence? No, they don't believe that. Why? Because they say, and rightly so in this instance, that all actions are necessarily temporal. They all have a beginning and time. But then because of that, they say that they must be on the side of creation, because if they subsisted as temporal entities or temporal actions, temporal events with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then that would negate their whole argument for the existence of God, which is huduth al-ajsam, this whole concept that anything that has temporal origination within it, it itself must be makhluk, it must be created. So why do they have to deny that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually speaks, or that he actually has actions that subsist with his essence? Because it would negate their main argument for the existence of God, and it refutes or goes against their kalami principle that anything that has temporal origination or temporal events within it, it itself must be makhluk, it itself must be created. We deny that. We say no, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can create things by his will and his power, he can speak by his will and his power, he can do different things by his will and power at different times, and those actions, whatever those actions are, they genuinely subsist with his essence. We don't say that his act equals the effect. If anybody knows basic Arabic, and they want to accuse me of not knowing basic Arabic, but if anyone knows basic Arabic and the structure of the entire Quran, you have what? You have the doer of the action, or the subject of the action, the doer of the action, who's the agent. Then you have the act, and then you have what is produced by the act, or the thing that is acted upon, right? You have this three-tiered system. That's how the Arabic language works. The Ash'aris say, no. You have the act, and you have the effect, and the act equals the effect. You don't have a distinct action which subsists with Allah, which is then responsible for creating the effect or acting upon the effect. They don't believe in that. I'll show you that the Salaf actually held our position, although Al-Buti already admitted that Imam Ahmed didn't hold their position. But let's give some first-hand references here. So Al-Bukhari, who we know, who all Sunnis love and revere and respect, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have mercy upon him. What does he say? Now, I want the Ash'aris to be honest. Do Ash'aris believe that the actions of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are his sifat, are his attributes? No, that's not the mainstream position. They say that anything that refers to his acts is on the side of creation in terms of either relations or the effect itself. So that directly contradicts Bukhari when he says, and I quote, so Allah's action is his attribute. What? فَفِعْلُ اللَّهِ صِفَةُ اللَّهِ. His action is his attribute. Well, that negates the Ash'ari position right there. You're off the board. Then he says, and that which is acted upon is distinct from him. What? وَالْمَفْعُولُ غَيْرُهُ مِنَ الْخَلْقِ. That which is acted upon, the maf'ul, is distinct from him, being a part of creation. It's a part of creation. So you have what? You have Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who's the actor or the doer of the act. You have the act itself, right, which he says is a sifa, which is an attribute of Allah. Let me say this again very clearly for you guys. فَفِعْلُ اللَّهِ صِفَةُ اللَّهِ وَالْمَفْعُولُ غَيْرُهُ مِنَ الْخَلْقِ. Very clear. Completely the Ash'ari position is gone now because they don't believe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's actions are attributes of his. So Imam al-Bukhari at this point now says, what do the Jahmiyyah say? The Jahmiyyah say, al-fi'lu wal-maf'ulu wahidun. The act is the same as that which is acted upon. The act and the effect are the same thing. And then he says, this is why they said to be, meaning when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says all he needs to do when he wants to create something, he says be to it, and it is. He says the be, the act of be, meaning the speech be, is makhluq, is created. And the people of knowledge say, so now he opposes it. It's not only Imam al-Bukhari as a rogue who has this position that the actions are actually attributes. No. He says, opposes it with the Jahmiyyah, which is what the Ash'aris are basically saying. And then he says, but the people of knowledge say, وَقَالَ أَهْلُ الْعِلْمِ التَّخْلِيقُ فِعْلُ اللَّهِ. The act of bringing something in existence, meaning the act of creating, is an act of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's what the people of knowledge say. They don't say it's something in creation itself. No, not at all. God forbid. Then this one, it caused many Ash'aris problems because, as you know, many Ash'aris have written commentaries on Imam al-Bukhari's hadith collection, and when they came across this passage, they didn't know what to do with it. Really, what does it say? This is a chapter heading, right? Chapter on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saying every day he is engaged in some affair, and his statement, and Allah's saying perhaps Allah will ordain a matter after that, and that his occurrences, exalted be he, are not similar to the occurrences of creation. According to the saying of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Most High, there is nothing like him, and he is the hearing, the seeing. Laysa kamithlihi shay. So what is Imam al-Bukhari saying here? Since we already established that according to al-Bukhari, the actions of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can be understood as his attributes or his sifat. Imam al-Bukhari also says that the fi'l is not the same thing as the maf'ul. The person who holds that position is the Jahmiyyah, which is then later taken up by some Ash'aris. So now we understand that the act of Allah and the effect are two different things, and that the act itself is a sifa or an attribute. Then he says here, talking about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's actions, he makes a distinction between something which has a beginning in time, something which is hadith, and something which is makhluq. In other words, he's saying something can have a beginning in time and yet not be created. And what do all of those things refer to in that instance? He's referring to the actions of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can have a beginning in time and not be created. Now the Ash'ari says, why can't this be consistent with the Ash'ari position? Then he goes on to say, Imam al-Bukhari, that but laysa kamithlihi shay, meaning the acts or the temporal occurrences, the new actions of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are not like creation, meaning they're not created, they're not makhluq. But the Ash'ari says, not only are they similar, that they say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's actions are actually identical to the effect. So they're identical to the creation. So this can't be Imam al-Bukhari position, cannot be the Ash'ari position, because he's saying that laysa kamithlihi shay, the actions of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are different than the creation. But the Ash'aris and the Jahmiyyah say that they're the same thing. Now, one last last quote again here, because remember we mentioned before about be, right? And which is related to the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So now Imam al-Bukhari, referring to other scholars like Ibn Uyayna, what does he say? In the discussion of this verse, indeed to him belongs the creation and the command. Blessed is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Lord of the worlds. Ibn Uyayna said, Allah has distinguished the creation from the command by saying, indeed to him belongs the creation and the command. So the Salaf actually use this ayah from the Quran to say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's commands are not created, because he says the command and the creation, right? The creation and the command. So they're two distinct things. This is how Imam al-Bukhari understands it, and he's appealing to Ibn Uyayna. And these are not the only scholars that have done this. Numerous scholars have done this, right? Of appealing to this verse to understand that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's commands are not makhluk, are not created, right? Because they're actions of his that subsist with him. And then furthermore, an example. So you want to talk about kalam, we're talking about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaking. Now listen to this. Remember that he said the Jahmiyyah say that be is makhluk, is created. Allah's speech of saying be is created. But he says, and as he stated, meaning Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala stated, his command is that only when he intends a thing that he says to it be and it is. So what is a command? It is a command of be and it is. It is command of be, meaning it is kalam, it is speech. He says be and it is. And as he stated, and of his signs is that the heaven and earth remain by his command. And he did not say by his creation. So they remain by his command. His command involves speaking. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can create via speaking. And what? The creation is not the same thing as his command. The command and the act of speaking is not created. And all of these things, of course, have a beginning in time, according to Imam al-Bukhari and what we just went over, that these are new events. Now, I mentioned already how that completely refutes the Ash'ari position. But now to show that I'm not just biasly reading Imam al-Bukhari, let's go to a scholar, and one that Dr. Shadi might like as a Maliki, which I'm also a Maliki in fiqh, Ibn Battal al-Maliki, who's one of the early commentators on Imam al-Bukhari's hadith collection. What does he say about the passage we just read? Al-Bukhari aimed to distinguish between the attributions of createdness and temporality to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's speech. In other words, Al-Bukhari meant to make a distinction in terms of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's speech between that which is makhluk and that which has a beginning in time, or that which is muhdath. So Imam al-Bukhari believed that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's speech could be muhdath, or have a beginning in time, and yet not be makhluk, not be created. This is what Ibn Battal al-Maliki is saying. Not me, although I'm agreeing with him. He's interpreting those passages in the same way. So say Jake doesn't know Arabic, he's a moron. Say I don't know anything I'm talking about. You can use whatever slanders on me that you guys want. I don't really care. But then are you going to say the same thing about Ibn Battal al-Maliki? He was just ignorant. He didn't know Arabic. He didn't know any of this stuff. He's completely misrepresenting Imam al-Bukhari. And he'll go on to say that he doesn't agree with that position. So it's not out of his own self-interest. He says he prohibited describing it as created and permitted describing it as temporal based on the verse. So Imam al-Bukhari is giving tafsir of different ayat, and based on those ayat, he's saying that, which we just read, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's speech, be or kalam, can have a beginning in time, it can be muhdath, but yet is not necessarily makhluk, is not created. And then he says, he attributes to this, and he says, and this is the position of some of the Mu'tazila and the people of literalism, and it is wrong. So also note that he says that Imam al-Bukhari's position, which he accurately represents, is wrong, it's incorrect, but he doesn't say, oh, it's a deviant position, this is bid'ah, this is kufr, this is this and that, which according to the Ash'aris, this would be actually a deviant position. This would at minimum be a position of bid'ah. If you believe, and I'll ask this for Yasser al-Hanafi or Dr. Shadi al-Masri, if you believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, his actions can have a beginning in time, and yet they subsist with his essence and are not created, is this a deviant position? Is this bid'ah? Or is it merely only a mistake? Is it only merely a wrong opinion that we disagree with? Or is it kufr? Which level does it fit into? That's what we want to know, because this is the Salafi position. This is the Athari position. This is the position of Ahl al-Hadith. We want to know if the position expressed according to Ibn Battal al-Maliki, which we're going to say we agree with is the correct correct interpretation of Imam al-Bukhari, did he hold a deviant view? Is this view deviant? Which category does it fall under? We would like to know. Now this is for Yasser al-Hanafi, shout out to Yasser al-Hanafi, al-Kashmiri, who many may know, right? Muhammad Anwar Shah al-Kashmiri. He was a Deobandi scholar, which Yasser al-Hanafi is a Deobandi. I know he's trying to get away from the sectarianism, but I'm saying he's trained as a Deobandi. I'm not saying it to hate on him, I'm just stating facts. So this is one of the most popular, one of the most revered Deobandi scholars of their tradition is al-Kashmiri. Now what does he say? Does he say, Jake, you're wrong, you're totally misrepresenting him, you Salafi and Ethides and Taymis all have a ridiculous position? No. What does he say about Imam al-Bukhari's position? He says, and the very same thing that Ibn Taymiyyah said, the great boogeyman that is responsible for all this deviance according to them, and the very same thing that Ibn Taymiyyah said, al-Bukhari said also. He said that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is described with attributes of action that are temporal, meaning they have a beginning in time, but the commentaries reinterpreted his words. Now I just showed you that Ibn Battal al-Maliki didn't try to make ta'wil of Imam al-Bukhari's statements, but there were later commentaries and later interpreters of Imam al-Bukhari's text that tried to make ta'wil and say, no, that's not what he's saying, Jake. No, Ibn Battal al-Maliki, that's not really what he's saying. No, al-Kashmiri, that's really not what he's saying. And there are other scholars. I have a whole article on this subject, which I'll link in the description of this video, where I go through this whole thing. There are other scholars that didn't try to make ta'wil, but later scholars did, a lot of them. So he says, Ibn Taymiyyah and Imam al-Bukhari on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's actions have the exact same position in that his actions subsist with him and they can have a beginning in time. He can speak to Musa alayhi salam and then stop speaking to him. He can speak to us on the day of judgment, and before that he wasn't speaking to us. I'm going to also link Brother Abdurrahman, shout out to him. He just opened a new channel and has a brilliant video which relates to this. This is the mother of all issues between the disputes between the Ash'aris and the Ethides. They have this kalami principle that anything that has new occurrences within it must be makhluk. We want the argument for that. There are no good arguments for it, whether from aqli or naqli. Both, we can refute all of them. So bring your arguments for that principle and we'll deal with them. But Brother Abdurrahman has dealt with that and showed how really a lot of their disputes, when they say, oh, but you're saying, Jake, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is trapped in time, or that he is a prisoner to time, astaghfirullah, or that he changes, or that he is going from being perfect to not perfect. All of those things are just bad terminology that they're using to try to cast doubt upon our position. No, we don't use those dirty words. They cast these dirty words. What does it mean? What do they mean, Jake? You're saying that God is a prisoner of time, astaghfirullah, or that God changes. What does it mean for God to change or be, trapped in time? All it means in our position and what we're affirming is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can do different things at different times. You don't actually believe, the Ash'aris don't actually believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is capable of doing different things at different times. He cannot actually have actions that subsist with his essence. He cannot perform an action. He cannot speak after not speaking. He cannot speak and then stop speaking. So you guys are the one that are limiting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not us in this case, okay? Now, al-Kashmiri goes on to say further, as Imam al-Bukhari appealed to who? Ahl al-ilm. He didn't say that this is just his opinion. He didn't say that this is his own ijtihad. He gave tafsir based upon ayat of Quran and appealed to earlier authorities and said that this is the position of Ahl al-ilm, right? The people of knowledge. Whereas the Jahmiyyah hold the position of the later Ash'aris, at least a majority of them, a good portion of them. So al-Kashmiri notes that it wasn't only Imam al-Bukhari who had the same position as Ibn Taymiyyah. He says that the scholars of hadith had the same position. As for the muhaddithun, scholars of hadith, they are of two groups regarding this matter. Some of them denied that the Creator, exalted as He, is a subject to temporal events, meaning that He can speak and then stop speaking, etc. And some affirmed it, meaning an entire group of muhaddithun, scholarly tradition, of our scholarly tradition, held the same position as Bukhari and Ibn Taymiyyah. Then what does he say? So he was very honest so far. There remain the mutakallimun, and they agreed upon denying it, which is the more safe and correct position. So it is true that some of the muhaddithun, especially the later ones who were influenced, some of them to some level of kalam and the Ash'ari schools, they actually did side with the mutakallimun. Some of them, right? Some of them, especially the later ones. But the majority of Ahl al-Hadith, the scholars of Hadith, the muhaddithun, especially the early scholars of Hadith, they held the position of Imam al-Bukhari and Ibn Taymiyyah. Then Kashmiri contrasts it with the position of the mutakallimun, of the Ash'aris, of the Mu'tazila, they're considered people of kalam, and the Maturidis. They all held in denying in this position, which he then goes on to say the position of the al-mutakallimun is aslam and ahkam. According to what? According to al-Kashmiri. So he notes and admits that this was the position of Imam al-Bukhari, but then says, nah, I want to actually side with the mutakallimin because it is safer and more correct. Which we would say the opposite. It's not safer, it's a deviant position, and it's not correct. This is the last reference or the last quote that I want to give, just to show this is not only Imam al-Bukhari. I want to show specifically on the issue of kalam and the Quran, what does Imam al-Tabari say? And nobody disputes Imam al-Tabari, one of the giant imams of the Sunni tradition. What does he say? He says the Quran is the speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and his revelation, since it is from the meanings of his oneness. The correct position in our view, meaning not just al-Tabari's view, but again, the people of knowledge, is that it is the speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, uncreated. Now, many of the Ash'aris will say, oh, we believe that. We believe the Quran is uncreated. We believe the Quran is ghayr makhluq. It's not created. But what they mean by that is kalam nafsi, not the Arabic Quran. But what does al-Tabari mean by it? Does he mean kalam nafsi, this concept that al-Tabari would have had no idea of even dreaming up at the time? Or does he mean the Arabic Quran? Of course he means the Arabic Quran. He says, the correct position in our view is that the speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is uncreated, regardless of how it is written, where it is recited or read, whether it is found in the heavens or on the earth, where it is preserved, written in the preserved tablet, inscribed in the young students' learning boards, engraved on a stone or written on paper, whether memorized in the heart or articulated by the tongue. So what is that referring to? That's referring to the Arabic Quran, not just a ma'na, not just some eternal meaning, kalam nafsi, that al-Tabari had no idea about. It's referring to the Arabic Quran is not created. What is the thing that's not created? The thing that's recited, that's memorized, that's heard, all of that, which refers to the Arabic Quran very clearly. Whoever says otherwise, whoever says that the Arabic Quran is created, or claims that there is a Quran on earth or in the heavens other than the Quran we recite with our tongues and write in our manuscripts, or believes anything other than that in his heart, or harbors it within himself, or says with his tongue, holding it as his religious belief, then he is a disbeliever. He's a kafir. So al-Tabari makes takfir, right? He says the people who hold this position, he makes takfir of them. They're kuffar. And what is the position that they hold? Those who say that there are two Qur'ans, that there is a Qur'an on earth, which is the Arabic Qur'an, and a different Qur'an, kalam nafsi, which is in heaven, or that is with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Who says that? The Ash'aris say that. We can actually show you explicit text where they say, oh, there are two Qur'ans. There's one on earth and there's one with Allah. Kalam nafsi Qur'an and then kalam lafzi Qur'an. One is created, one is uncreated. Al-Tabari refutes that position and says the person who believes this is a kafir. So I'll let you guys be the judge of that. Then he goes further. What about the kafir? Whose blood is lawful? Their blood is halal. Who is free from Allah and Allah is free from him by authority of Allah's statement. But this is an honored Qur'an in a preserved tablet. And he said, and his word is the truth, the exalted. And if any of the polytheists seek your protection, then grant him protection so that they may hear the word of Allah. Thus he, exalted is his praise, informed that it is written in the preserved tablet and that it is heard from the tongue of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. It is but one Qur'an heard from Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, written in the preserved tablet, and similarly it is preserved in the hearts and recited by the tongues of the elderly and the young. Very clearly, there's not two Qur'ans as the Ash'aris claim. What is the Qur'an that is uncreated that Imam Ahmed affirmed, that al-Tabari affirmed, that al-Bukhari affirmed, that the early Salaf of this ummah affirmed? It is the Arabic Qur'an that is uncreated according to them, not this kalam nafsi business, okay? So I hope that you guys found this video educational. I know that sometimes I'm getting a little passionate and riled up. Look, we're dealing with a serious issue here. Al-Tabari is making takfir over this issue, right? We're dealing with a very serious issue. This is the aqidah. This is our deen. This is no small matters. Now the people out there, they can make fun of me. They can say, Jake, you're this. They can do whatever they want. But are you going to deal with the actual argument being presented? Yasser al-Hanafi, this is a question directed at you, sir. Are you going to say that your Deobandi scholar, al-Kashmiri, is ignorant just like I am? That he doesn't know Arabic? That he has different motives? Like, I'm not saying that you're accusing me of that, but maybe you are. That you think I'm motivated, I have false motives, and therefore I'm just trying to misrepresent al-Bukhari. That I'm completely ignorant of Arabic. Let's say that both of those things are true. Is the same true for Ibn Battal al-Maliki, Shari al-Masri? Is the same true for al-Kashmiri, Yasser al-Hanafi? That's the question we would like to know. And the position which Imam al-Bukhari has, and which which Al-Tabari has, and which we are saying we're representing. I would like to know from you guys, you two scholars, what is that position? What category does it fall under? Is it bid'ah? Is it deviant? Is it kufr? Is it just an incorrect position, but there's ikhtilaf? What is it? Is it the correct position? We know you won't say that. I'm genuinely want to know, what is that position categorized as? With that being said, guys, there was so much other stuff in their video that I could have addressed, but as you can see, the video is almost an hour now, and I'm only addressing one small issue. I could have refuted many other things, but I think this video should stand on its own in terms of what the position of the Salaf was. What is our position? Ibn Taymiyyah's position is no different than Imam al-Bukhari's position on this issue. And what is the Ash'ari position? What is the position of the Mu'tazila? What do they agree on? Where is the slight difference only in terms of name of Kalam Nafsi or Ilm? I hope all of that made sense to you guys, and I hope that you found it educational. If you did and would like to see more videos like it, then please consider subscribing to the channel. Hit the notification bell so you get notified of future videos. Like this video, comment on it, and let me know your thoughts. Let me know if you think I'm wrong or I'm out of pocket or what. Please let me know. Share this on your social media platforms, no matter how big or how small your reach is. It really does help with the algorithm, guys. And if you want to go above and beyond and support my channel, then there are two ways to do it. With one-time donations, the best way to do it is the GoFundMe link, which is pinned at the top of the description of this video, as well as my other videos and in the comment section. Alternatively, if you want to become a monthly member and a contributor to my work here on the channel, then the best way to do so is at the Patreon link, which is pinned in the same locations that I just mentioned. With that being said, guys, until next time, inshallah, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.